Haircut. Yeah, I got a new haircut. You can stop asking me now. Hey, all you Ethicuties, welcome to the coolest place to be every Tuesday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, I got a real treat for you today. I got the one and only Christopher Martin. We're going to be talking about open payments. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat because your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And connect with someone today. You know, particularly in healthcare. You know, we're doing these healthcare episodes on Tuesdays now due to the phenomenal response we've been getting from folks. Particularly in healthcare, you got to engage in this network. Many times budgets are getting slashed. Many times we feel like we're pushing a string up the hill, reinventing wheels, which we get no bonus points for. You got to connect with one person today. And if you are here for credits, well, congratulations, you're going to get a bunch of credits. So we give out thousands of credits all the time. Readers are leaders, learners are leaders, all of that. You got to continue to feed that brain with new thought leadership, with new ideas. And it's amazing how your brain will just figure out problems. So reach out across the aisle. Meet somebody. If you're, struggling with a certain problem, I guarantee somebody on this call has conquered that issue. And get yourself some credits if you're with the Compliance Certification Board or SHRM or HRCI. We also got a lot of books, of course, in the Ethico library. We are giving away hundreds of books all the time, and we got more to give out today. So we're going to be giving out 5, and we got a great podcast series going with the one and only Tom Fox. So we're talking about AI. You can search for this on YouTube. There's a whole playlist of about 6 episodes so far. There's a couple more coming, but we're talking about how you can actually leverage AI. We're not scratching the surface. We're diving deep on different aspects of the program on how you can engage it. Let me give you a little taste so you can wet your beak.
So, for instance, my millennial daughter, I'm like, honey, why don't you ever call? And Dad, what's a phone? I'll text you. I want to talk to you. I'm like, that's not talking, honey. She goes, shut up, Dad. People communicate differently now. And why is it so important to have a tool like a reporting tool that meets your employees where they want to communicate with you and how they want to communicate with you and how they're comfortable communicating?
I think it's an engagement question at the end of the day, right? We want them to feel engaged on sort of a macro level to say, oh, I see something wrong. I want to share this because I believe in the organization. The mission of the organization resonates with me. I'm kind of part of this thing. But then on a micro level, we want to make it easy for them to engage in that. Those channels for this risk intelligence, all those channels should be easy to interact with. And ideally, we on the other end of it, as like investigators or people downstream from the reports that these channels are generating, we should ideally be agnostic across those channels. How true it is. So I want you to check out that podcast. You know, me and Tom won an award on podcasts, so we are an absolutely great duo. And I'm also about to drop into the chat this little game I made. We're going to be talking this week about cool, cheap strategies, cost-effective strategies to drive your Compliance Week. Compliance Week is just around the corner, so check out this thing that I dropped in the chat. It's a compliance and ethics charades game made out of emojis. Can you imagine? You can see my recent LinkedIn post as well if you want to kind of personalize that game for your own organization. So we got to leverage these tools. That's what me and Tom are talking about on that podcast. We got to leverage these tools that are at our fingertips to really solve for the outcome, put the ball in the net, as I say. We're going to be giving away some books today. Of course, we're giving away 5 copies of Christian Hunt's book, Humanizing Rules. If you have not read this book yet, I highly recommend that you are active in the chat. And if you don't feel like typing because you're eating a sandwich and you got a mouthful of food, all good. Hop over to Amazon and pick that up. It's money well spent. Our disclosure tool is, we made a bunch of investments in our disclosure tool. So thank you, all of you who have contributed ideas. We really are trying to build tools that help bend the curve for compliance and ethics officers. Disclosures is something we're going to be talking about a bit today. Let me give you a little commercial on that. It'll be brief, I guarantee it.
The auditors just called. They want to see last year's disclosure records, but they're scattered across emails, spreadsheets, and shared drives. Half the forms are missing and the rest are inconsistent.
Transform your disclosure management with Ethico. Templated forms for COIs, GIFs, and incidents with branching logic and easy configurability. Every disclosure tracked, time-stamped, and securely stored. Easily drill down and filter by status, location, disclosure type, and more. Automated sends and reminders ensure nothing falls through the cracks. Real-time comparative dashboards reveal patterns and emerging risks. Ethico disclosure forms. Manage, mitigate, resolve. Talk to your client success manager to learn more.
Yeah, so hit that button if you'd like to see a demo on what we have going. We were recently rated the best ethics and compliance software in the world by the company G2, which is Angie's List if you're from the 90s, or it's like Yelp if you're from the 2000s, all for software. So there's a bunch of great reviews on there from verified users, so you can get a little taste of what you might see coming. All right, what's coming? Last little plug here. On the 24th, we're a couple weeks away from the biggest event of the summer, next to vacation, next to 4th of July. Biggest event of the summer, which is Ethicsverse Day. We had a ton of success last year. We got 4 great sessions. And look at this cool ad our team
On
put
July
together.
24th, the one-day learning event of the summer is returning to a computer screen near you. Ethicsverse Day is back and better than ever. An all-day virtual event packed with guidance from leaders in the ethics and compliance space. 4 epic sessions over 12 CEUs and insights from industry leaders such as, for session 1, Tom Tipper X Harden, Ellen Coons, Mary Inman, and Sharon Watkins. For session 2, Matt Kelly, Andrew McBride, and Reed Blackman. For session 3, Leah Simonton, Scott Hogan, and Matt Axelrod. And this year, we've included a bonus session with Hema Lomax. Don't miss out on the grand return of this prestigious event. July 24th. Register now at ethico.com.
It's going to be awesome. Great sessions all day. We're going to be giving away a bunch of books. The chat's going to be wild. We have gift packs and all that. And the one and only Sharon Watson, who took down Enron. Okay, she's going to be there in the beginning session. So you are not going to want to miss it. Okay, with that, let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Christopher Martin. You've heard of him perhaps from Coldplay. This guy's way cooler anyways. So we're going to be diving in today talking about open payments. Christopher, how's it going, buddy? Good to see you.
Hey, it's going great. It's a beautiful day here in South Florida, and so we're just happy to be here.
Good, very good. All right, well, let's dive right in. So why don't you give us a high-level overview of what we mean when we talk about vendor interactions with physicians and teaching hospitals in healthcare? Why is this such a critical concern for patients in our industry right now?
I think it's critical for a couple of reasons. One, it's not just the teaching hospitals, it's the vendors' interaction with physicians in general and how that influences their prescribing habits. You know, we're not in the territory of kickbacks because that's a quid pro quo situation, but we are definitely thinking about, well, what is the physician prescribing it? Is it in the best interest of the patient? And whenever you take that to a teaching hospital, you know, we have residents who are coming up into will eventually be practicing medicine on their own, and they're seeing the teaching physicians engaging in certain behaviors that then they feel like, well, that's customary and that's acceptable for me to do as well. And so it can continue to proliferate the behaviors that we don't necessarily think are in the best interest of the patients. As some of the research has demonstrated, we can often see that the physicians might be engaging in prescribing medications based solely on the fact that they received a meal, and that can be problematic.
Frank made a comment, and he seems pretty excited. Frank is always an active participant in the chat, but he's talking about how this can be really compliance gold when considering policies. And I think what you kind of referenced is the potential kind of dissonance between the words that are written on the page and the actions that folks observe in the quote-unquote real world.
Yeah, I think so. There have been a lot of studies that have been conducted out there about the impact of that. For instance, in 2019, ProPublica looked at a lot of the open payments data, and they found some pretty interesting skews of individuals or physicians that were more likely to prescribe medications solely based upon the fact that they had received something from the vendors, the manufacturers of the pharmaceuticals, the manufacturers of medical devices.
And, you know, there's that famous study about reciprocity, right? Where they were testing what tips folks would get from mints. And they put 1 mint in and the tips went up a little bit. And they put 2 mints in and then it went up a little bit more. And when those words were attached to those couple of mints to say, hey, for you special folks, you're going to get some extra mints here, they got even more. So what we're fighting against in many ways is like human nature. Like we're all wired for reciprocity. And these policies can sometimes cause some biases that maybe would not be naturally occurring had they not gotten some quote unquote mints. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's the whole reason why we have such a large push by manufacturers with sales reps. That's the reason why they're constantly knocking on the doors. That's the reason why they constantly have that FaceTime. They're wanting to develop that emotional connection, number one.
Right.
And number two, by giving you something, they create a situation where you're more likely to engage with that product. And in the situation with a physician, it's more likely that they're going to prescribe that medication or that medical device. And that can be problematic because it may not always be in the best interest of the patient, not just from a efficacy point of view, as far as the drug or the device actually being beneficial for the patient, but also from a cost perspective. As we're seeing the increase in cost of medical devices and pharmaceuticals skyrocket in this country. I mean, recently I heard on the television an injection for this HIV prevention drug is going to cost $30,000-$40,000 a year. And I think that that's pretty whenever we're talking about on the cutting edge of developing new products, that's pretty much where things are going to go. And so with astronomical prices, you begin wondering, well, are those higher prices really worth the benefit? And is the physician doing the work they need to do to better understand, or are they solely basing it upon a nice dinner at Ruth's Chris? And that's always the rub, right? To make sure that we are doing what's in the best interest of our patients.
I might start to consider Ruth's Chris because I've been a kind of a Longhorn guy and wondering why this reciprocity is not taking hold. Longhorn's underrated, by the way. So here's a question from Frank. He did a poll last year, and it seemed that about 83% don't really look at open payments data much unless the provider has received more than $5,000. When you're thinking about thresholds, like what are some of the thresholds that you would advise folks to look at? Is that 5,000 too high? Again, you can go to Longhorn like a dozen times for 5K. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I really think for me, thresholds are not the best way to go. I used to think about thresholds in the $10,000 space. Anything over $10,000 was a substantial investment by that organization. But research shows that it can be simply a $2,000 speaking fee can influence that prescriber's habits. And then also just 1 or 2 meals can influence that physician's behavior. So more of what we're looking at doing is moving away from those thresholds and just going ahead and confirming through an annual review of the data, where are you on this? Did you receive this? If so, let's go ahead and put a conflict of interest management plan in place. Let's circulate that with our procurement team so that they're aware, because that's where our biggest rub is going to be within the organization, is ensuring that those individuals who have some sort of outside relationship, our procurement team is aware of that, so that we don't have those new products coming in unless they're in the best interest of the patient. And so the procurement team is then able to accept that conflict of interest management plan. If that physician happens to come in and make a recommendation, they're able to reflect on the conflict of interest management plan that's in place, and then we can have a better process going forward on actually procuring those drugs. And then on the back end of that, we're also looking at it from an education perspective. To your point, I think it was Frank who said that 82% don't look, and you're exactly right. So every year around the time when open payments becomes available for disputing, we do a massive push in which we talk about to all of our employed physicians, and we try to reach out to community docs as well. Please look to see whether or not the open payments data that's been attributed to you can be disputed from your perspective. Because the problem with open payments data is that there is no check within the system. There is no, right. It is solely based upon a vendor or manufacturer submits that data, and then the one that is attributed to has to dispute it. The CMS never regulates those disputes. So the vendor could easily just say, I don't agree with your dispute, and still publish the information, but it can be completely inaccurate. Even as a teaching hospital, we have to engage in those activities. because things get attributed to us. And we have found many errors in that attribution. So open payments data it can be a window into what's going on, but you also have to take it with how accurate is that? And that's the reason why that collaboration with the physicians, going to the physicians once that open payments data becomes available and communicating with them about, look, this is what we're seeing, how accurate is this, what do we need to do to put in as a conflict of interest management plan to ensure that we're protecting you and we're protecting the organization.
So let's zoom out. Let's go kind of big picture here. You mentioned in our pre-show that July 1st marks a significant date for compliance pros because the 2024 open payment data becomes available. Can you talk to us a little bit about like what this open payments program is, why it's collected, and why this release on July 1st is so important for organizations like yours and organizations that might be represented on this episode?
Yeah, so Senator Chuck Grassley, maybe back in 2010, 2011, really started pushing this bill. And then it became in effect, and we started collecting data in 2014. And so what it requires is applicable manufacturers. So you have either pharmaceutical manufacturer or medical device manufacturer has to report into the open payments data system every time that they've given a transfer of value to physicians. And transfers of value can be anything from speaking fees, honoraria, to textbooks, articles. It can be cups of coffee at a presentation that they put on. And there are some de minimis values that can be attributed, but generally most of the applicable manufacturers are reporting everything. So back in 2016, I worked for Johnson & Johnson in one of the medical device companies. And part of my responsibility was helping to comb through the data that we were going to submit into open payments. And the number of issues that we would find and correct was an ongoing process. And that data had to be submitted at a certain time in order for the opportunity for teaching hospitals and physicians to be able to dispute that. And that dispute period typically is in the March timeframe. Now, July 1 is when that data becomes available. July 1, it was a reflection on all of the payments that occurred in the preceding year. So there are sort of 2 points in time whenever compliance professionals need to be paying attention. One is then a dispute and review period back in March, and then whenever it becomes actually available on July 1. So what the problem is, though, is that July 1, when it becomes available, it's a massive file. It's 800 megabytes to download. And so it becomes 15.4 million records. I'm looking at the data right now for 2024, 15.4 million lines of data. And so whenever you're looking at that, it can be overwhelming to a compliance professional unless you have the necessary data analytics skills. So sometimes it's important to rely on someone in IT to help comb through that data. It then gives you the opportunity to be able to use the NPIs of your physicians, the National Provider Index numbers, to be able to locate the data components that are important for your organizations. It used to be that the NPIs were not included, and they modified that a few years ago so that now we can use those NPI data to be able to pull that down to triangulate to the physicians that are concerned. Once you have that data, what's important is then to be able to say, well, what is our risk tolerance on this? Is our risk tolerance going to be a $5,000 threshold, like Frank said, or is it going to be higher, $10,000 threshold? And I think each organization has to set that themselves, right, in collaboration with those physicians, recognizing the risk that might arise. We took more of the approach, or we're taking more of the approach, that it's better to just go ahead and ask the physician, because we do annual conflict of interest surveys. We then look at the data that we have. We reflect back onto the annual conflict of interest survey that they completed back in January, and then determine whether or not they need to update their conflict of interest based upon the data that has been shown to us through open payments. And then we might go so far as to put a conflict of interest management plan in place in order to be able to manage that within the system. So that way we don't get into a situation where we have a physician asking for a new product or working on a request for proposal committee trying to authorize or trying to allow a product in a new organization without us knowing that they've received payments from that vendor.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a question of transparency. The existence of someone on the open payments register is not necessarily bad, but we don't want to be, to your point, in a situation where we don't know about it and we don't have eyes on a potential conflict. We have our company Ethico has a sanction screening and license monitoring tool, and we're going to be rolling out open payment screening on there to kind of take some of that load off of folks. And the existence of that MPI data in that register does a lot to allow us to sort through this, massive file, or allows folks to sort through that massive file a lot more quickly. There's a good anecdote in the chat from Sherry. She said that she asked we ask our providers. This is me as Sherry now. Okay, we ask our providers to check as well last year after we analyzed our attestations, and we were looking into one provider that had a higher dollar amount. He said he should be at 0. And after looking into it, he discovered that there was another provider with his same exact name, and the vendors were tagging meals to his name, and it was the wrong physician. So he had to go submit to CMS and get that corrected. I encouraged him to really look into it next time. So talk to us a little bit about like the ins and outs or the logistics of something like that. I mean, this must be a situation where that NPI number wasn't included or something, right?
Yeah, I think it's possible that occurred, but you've also got to understand is that depending on the size of the organization, there could be millions and millions of lines of data. And for one, like let's say it's a massive organization, say Johnson & Johnson or BioZimmer or someone else that's a rather a large organization. And so you have a data collection problem, right? So there is no standard way for them to collect this data. Oftentimes, especially with smaller companies, they may have a homegrown methodology for doing that. And so they may not always be accurate. And the physician may not be entering his MPI number on his sign-in sheet. And so the sales rep might be going on to an MPI database trying to find the MPI number, or they might be using it on the data entry side or the data collection side. One of the data analysts might be doing it. So there's just the possibility for quite a few errors to occur within that. And this is the reason why it's very important that both teaching hospitals and physicians, and also physician assistants and non-physician providers in general, should be able to go in and dispute whenever able, because ultimately that's going to be published. And the reason why it was originally published was because Senator Grassley felt that it was important for patients to understand the influence of applicable manufacturers on the physician's behavior. Because patients often are trusting the physician. The physician is a fiduciary role. And so if my physician says to me, Chris, I think you need this medication to be able to alleviate this illness, I'm going to go with that medication. I don't know that I have the wherewithal or the knowledge base to necessarily question. Of course, I can pull out my phone and Google it, but we know where that can go too. That can be a rabbit hole. So the goal really was for patients to be able to know, well, why is my physician prescribing this? Is it because it's in my best interest, or because they receive funds? And ultimately, I think it's an opportunity for compliance to protect our patients as well, to be able to use that information to ensure that we're holding up quality outcomes and patient safety first for our patients.
There's no real control, to your point, on what gets submitted there. So it's kind of incumbent on us, or it's incumbent on the physicians themselves to check and make sure that whatever is on that register is an accurate reflection of reality. When you're thinking about monitoring that or checking against that open payments data, which again, as you said, 2024's came out on July 1st, just a few days ago, where are you looking? Are you just looking over the 2024? Are you looking over the last couple of years, the last few years? How do you kind of think about where the risk really lives?
So it depends upon the physician, right? So in general, I think what we're doing immediately when we do a massive download like that is we're looking at the initial disclosures, right? So did the conflict of interest form, the attestation form that I received back in January from the physician, was it accurate? Do I need them to update their form? And then do I need to put a conflict of interest management plan in place? Then there's other opportunities to be able to say, I'm having to do an investigation on a physician So and it's related to this product or this pharmaceutical or this physician that seems to be displaying strange behaviors, wanting to engage in outside activities, things like that. What is the trajectory that I'm looking at, sort of a longitudinal study, if you will, of what they've been engaging in? And I can often see, whenever I do that, I can see sort of this increase of over time of where originally maybe it was a couple of dinners one year. The next thing you know, it's next year it's speaking fees. And then beyond that, it just starts increasing, especially as those individuals rise within the market. As they rise among their peers, they start becoming key opinion leaders. And key opinion leaders are essential for the pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers in trying to push their products. I think I saw a recent study that said that key opinion leaders are effective for about 37% of physicians, that they rely on their opinions for their prescribing habits. So if you can, as a medical device manufacturer or pharmaceutical company, you can identify a physician early on who's going to become a key opinion leader, and you can start having them within your stable of physicians to be able to push your product out there, then you can start having more power in the market. And you can start seeing that in the trajectory when you look over time of those entries and open payments.
Yeah, just kind of understanding those interworkings behind the scene can give us some clues on what the risks that might manifest in our business might be, or, you know, in the context of patient safety. How does this intersect with the Sunshine Act? And what role does this kind of play together in that?
Well, the Sunshine Act was what was established the open payments database, right? And so I think really what that allows us to do is to bring those payments into the open. And to your point earlier, Nick, you said these payments aren't necessarily bad, right? We do need physicians to be aware of these products. We do need physicians to be out there speaking about these products, right? Because I think that there is some benefit to our healthcare community whenever there is a physician who can say, I've used this product, this is the result of that product, it's safe and effective for my patients. And I think there's a lot of benefit for that. The issue that can come into play, though, is whenever we move beyond just the physicians allowing the effectiveness to drive their decision making, and more of the relationship or the entertainment aspects of what they've received driving their prescribing habits.
So before we dive deeper, what do you think some of the most common, even like seemingly innocuous examples of interactions between vendors and medical staff that could potentially lead to conflicts of interest? Like you said, I mean, I gave the example of the mints from that famous study, but these things can range, you know, kind of across the board with, you know, very high dollar values. So what are some of those kind of innocuous examples, and like what types of transfers of value are we really talking about that are most important to consider? Is it any existence? How should we sort of look at that?
So it's funny is that I've seen some different studies out there. There's one that I'm looking at right now from 2016, and it demonstrated that just one single meal of around $20 was enough to influence the physician's behavior. And the issue that can come into play is that whenever you start putting how much is out there, we really don't know. And one of the things that you have to be able to do is be able to recognize that it could potentially create that conflict of interest, right? And so we're not talking about actual conflicts. We're not talking about actual influence on the prescribing behavior, but we're talking about the potential for it to be that way. And being able to address that potentiality with physicians is very important. Being able to openly communicate with them and understanding the problems that could arise from it. You can take into example the AMA. The AMA has a code of ethics out there, and in their code of ethics, they opine on physicians' interactions with vendors, medical device manufacturers, and pharmaceutical companies. And they're very clear in their guidance that everything should be of modest value, that their primary focus should be on the patient. And so often, whenever I was in the compliance side in the medical device industry, the sales reps aren't really focused so much on patient safety and effectiveness. I'm sure they are, but really at the end of the day, they're wanting to curry those relationships because they know that currying relationships drives value. And when you look at the ethical guidance from the American Medical Association on that, it's very clear that the relationship shouldn't guide our decisions. It's the efficacy of the product, or how beneficial it will be for that patient.
So I think this is where it kind of gets interesting, because many physicians and surgeons, don't get me started on surgeons, they really believe that accepting a meal or accepting a mint, you know what I'm saying, or a consulting fee or a speaking fee doesn't really sway their medical judgment. So what does the research tell us, particularly about, studies analyzing this open payments data with respect to the actual impact on vendor payments on physicians, prescribing different patterns, different, products, and making those different kinds of decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in, I think here I have the study in front of me. I think it was back in just recently, 2018. They did a study of 6 drugs, and in those 6 drugs, they found that physicians with just receiving 4 meals, 4 of those drugs, they were much more likely. In one instance, they were 8 times more likely to prescribe the medication compared to someone who had not done the same. Whenever you look at the ProPublica study, the same sort of data comes out as well. ProPublica says that whenever the physicians were taken out to meals, they were much more likely, 2 or 3 times more likely, to prescribe those medications. And it wasn't even that the medications were more effective. Actually, what they found was that they were name brand medications that oftentimes had more toxicity issues and were more pricey than the generic equivalent. So it wasn't about the patient safety, it wasn't about quality outcomes. It really was about having been taken out to a nice dinner and enjoyed yourself that changed the physician's prescribing habits on those drugs, at least from those research articles that I found.
So, I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because there's this real perverse incentive going on in the marketplace. Like, at the end of the day, this is a marketplace of commerce, and you have these salespeople and you have these organizations that are trying to increase their enterprise value by selling more stuff. And these salespeople, while of course they might, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 12th on their list of priorities, probably below the pontoon boat they're saving up for, are concerned about patient safety. They're trying to hit their quota. And then we have this sort of like, it's a cognitive bias. Like, we're all wired with these on the, provider side or on the physician side, where, they think that they can maintain this sort of objectivity. And yet that influence happens whether we kind of like it or not. And it's kind of up to us in compliance, particularly in healthcare, to kind of stand in the gap and help our organization navigate through this, inevitable conflict, or at least potential conflict.
I 100% agree. And I think that the more we talk about it, and the more we help the physicians understand that they are, whenever you're being given something free, you are the product, right? That's what we hear about social media these days. Whenever I hear people talking about Facebook and other things like that, and I think that's the same situation in here as well. Whenever the physicians are being given something, they are, especially a meal or something similar to that. Ultimately, what that rep is trying to do is to encourage them to use those products, and there's some benefit to that too, right? So let's say that a rep comes on site and is conducting an in-hospital training on the use of a medical device, and that's a medical device that we're going to be launching within the hospital, and they bring in some food because people like to eat during that meal, and that would be perfectly fine because there's a strong educational component to it. The difference, though, is whenever you start going to the restaurant outside of the hospital setting, then the question comes in, well, how much education is actually going on? Are we there more for entertainment purposes? I know whenever I was previously employed with Johnson & Johnson, our rule is that one sales rep cannot be with more than 4 physicians, because the idea was that once you get past 4 physicians, then you are necessarily more of an entertainment situation than you are in an education perspective. If you also look at the pharma code of ethics for sales for pharmaceutical industry, they discourage outside of the hospital, outside of the care setting engagement completely. They really think that most of the time that you need to be engaging with the physician and the staff about education should be on site. It's whenever you get into the medical device industry that the AdvaMed code is a little more lenient toward that. The Met Code, in contrast, does allow for you to take out physicians to dinner. Now, these are just codes of ethics, and codes of ethics aren't always followed by everyone. As we just said, sometimes there are those competing responsibilities, competing needs. And so if you have certain sales goals that you need to meet in order to meet those, meet your bonus requirements, you're going to do what you can to get those across. I had one sales rep ask me once if he could take doctors to Topgolf, because Topgolf had a conference room in the bottom area. I think there's a conference space. And
they're famous for their conference spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, no, we can't take physicians to Topgolf. That is primarily entertainment venue. How much education are you going to get done in a primarily entertainment venue? And if anything, the physicians are primarily going to be focused on when can they go upstairs to play a game at Topgolf. So I think that sales reps are often pushed in a direction to get those sales goals, and that can drive certain behaviors that, as compliance professionals, we have to teach our physicians to guard against, right? We have to partner with them. We have to collaborate with them, because most of the time they're focused on, what do I need to do for my patient? And number two, what are all of my peers doing? And if my peers are being taken out by the sales reps, then can I go as well? Right. And so I think that's what compliance needs to do on the back end of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You made the point earlier that within your own organization, you want to make sure that the behavior that's modeled is in line with those policies. And on the other side of the fence, whether it's a more strict, kind of regimen, or it's a looser regimen in terms of like the regulatory oversight on the vendor side, there's that same conflict happening, right? Like there are, of course, well-intending compliance officers in those organizations. You were one at Johnson & Johnson who's trying to kind of close that gap between, again, the words on the wall and the actual behaviors that are happening. But monkey see, monkey do. If all of their peers are, kind of bending those rules, and that's the culture in the organization, the odds for that undue influence is going to be significantly higher. And you made this point. I'd love for you to kind of like opine on this a little bit. But you made this point that, companies expend billions of dollars in would-be profits annually on physician payments of, many different sorts. And they wouldn't be doing that if they had any doubt that it would not make an impact on their sales, right? Like they're doing that because they think the ensuing sales are going to help them recoup those expenses by generating more prescriptions or more device sales.
Exactly right. I think that the industry has been at this for a while. They know exactly what they're doing. They're able to pull in all the psychology that's out there and able to generate these. I mean, back whenever I was in college, back in the 90s, I actually one summer sold Bibles door to door. It was a Thomas Nelson publisher out of Tennessee, and my job was to go door to door cold calling on families to buy Bibles and other religious books. And before I started doing that, I had to go through a week-long intensive training for sales. And they taught us all sorts of techniques on how to influence the people that we cold called on. There were simple things, sort of like if they open the door, but there's a screen door, and they won't open the screen door because you need to have no barrier between you. If there's a barrier between you and the person you're trying to sell to, you're not going to be able to make the sell. So what they taught us to do was just to act like we couldn't hear them through a screen door. And it worked 100% of the time. They would open up that screen door. The other thing they taught us to do is that once you ask if you can come in, you look down and you start wiping your feet. And that was this sort of physical, sort of like, I'm ready to come in. And so it would create this need in the individual to invite you in. There was just all sorts of ways that we were taught to influence the individual who was on the other side that we were trying to sell to. And I think that same sort of behavior occurs within 100%. The pharmaceutical company and the medical device manufacturing companies. Their sales reps are designed, the way that they go about their business is to increase those sales, because without them, those companies are not going to be profitable. And we don't see any not-for-profit, or that I'm not aware of, not-for-profits out there making the kinds of headlining drugs and medical devices that these companies are.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. And, you talked about influence. That's actually the title of one of my favorite books by Robert Cialdini. And I would encourage us all to read that book. I think I think we have it available in the Ethico library. So that would be available to anybody who gets picked for today's book. But that's a great book to learn just ourselves, because so much of our job is trying to influence the behavior, of the stakeholders who we're, responsible for within our organization. But there's another way to look at it. There's another way to look at it, because it helps us get in the mind of the salespeople who are influencing our stakeholders, and they might not even know it. Like, most physicians have not been, most of us have not done door-to-door sales. I have. That's why I knew I liked some about you. But you learn so many of these techniques, and these are sort of foundational, regardless of whether you're selling satellite dishes or you're selling pest control or you're selling, tens of thousands of dollars of medical devices. There's, it's still human to human, and we're trying to get a person to sign, as salespeople, you're trying to get people to sign on the line that is dotted, and that takes connection, and it takes influence, and it takes, trying to resonate with that person. So all these tactics are being bombarded upon the physicians in this case, constantly by all of these other, for-profit organizations, to your point, who are trying to grow their business. Folks are trying to hit their quota, and they're pulling all those levers. And so much of the stuff that we're talking about happens on a subconscious level. To your point, you're wiping the feet. Well, that's a social cue. You know what I'm saying? You're referencing, hey, Susie and Joe down the street just bought a whole stack of Bibles. That's creating some social proof. So all these kinds of things of name dropping and reciprocity and liking and all these things are really foundational to that influence, which we, of course, like I said, can leverage. We can leverage that as we try to influence folks within our organization. But I think when we can kind of tune in, you don't have to go to, you don't have to go kind of door to door, but you can read a book like this, and you're going to start to see, oh my gosh, these kinds of tactics are being employed on the people that I'm responsible for, from a, from an open payments perspective, or from a bias that might be created that could influence patient safety.
Exactly right. I agree. And I think it's important as compliance professionals that whenever we have conversations with physicians, that we approach it from a collaboration point of view, right? We're here to support, and coming at it from any other perspective will only create a defensive situation. So that's the reason why I encourage my staff and myself to always approach it as, let me better understand what's going on here, right? And I think it's 7 habits of highly successful people. That's one of the core ones, right? Is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I think that's important as compliance professionals, even when it comes to this open payments data. It's clear, like, all this has been attributed to you, but we don't need to approach it from I'm attacking you, more of like, well, let me better understand. Do you recall any of these things? Does this sound accurate to you? If so, what steps do we need to do to ensure that you're able to still be able to, bring products to the organization, but we're also able to look at those products with eyes wide open, and ensuring that we're protecting you and protecting our patients, protecting the organization. Because ultimately, this influence isn't going to stop. Open payments hasn't stopped. But I think I looked back in 2018, because I couldn't see the data from 2016, but it looked like there was $3.12 billion given to physicians, and now there's $3.33 billion. So we're seeing an increase over the time, and then the amount of research dollars as well is going up. So it's a big deal, and it's going to continue to persist. There's a reason why those commercials are on television so much for all of those medications, because they make so much money off of it. And so they're going to continue having sales reps taking physicians out, having physicians at speaking engagements and other types of activities.
And we've seen this 100 times, right? Throughout our lives, when our economy starts to hit sort of rough waters, that drives more, non-compliant behavior, right? Across all industries, inside our business, outside of our business, and so forth. So I'm saying, when we can zoom into and kind of connect, when we can zoom in on a micro level to what those interactions might be looking like, and how those might marginally change, and what lines folks might marginally step over, salespeople, for example, might marginally step over in the context of, rough economic waters where budgets are getting cut and so forth. Those quotas are not going down. So people start to kind of, they go into the red zone a little bit more. So the odds of this happening, again, in a economic downturn, or, something that's not so expansionary, is going to be a lot higher, And
I think that it's not just the risk for the sales reps too, but the physicians themselves. The physicians had to be mindful that, especially when we're talking about government payers, that their prescribing habits can be easily tracked, right? What they are prescribing as far as, pharmaceuticals or medical devices and their utilization of them can be benchmarked against other providers. And as a result of that, if the government were to ever start looking at CMS data, we don't know if they currently are, but they could be, especially the OIG.
Great point.
They could be easily looking at their prescribing habits and their data and trying to determine whether or not there is a causality between the two. Currently, the research really doesn't say that there is the transfers of value causes this to occur. There's not a 1-for-1, right? But there is definitely enough smoke there for us to take a closer look. And if, as a compliance professional, I'm saying take a closer look, you can bet that the OIG and the DOJ have considered that as well. It's just this massive amount of data, especially as we move into an AI era of where the AI agents can easily pull this data into it and consume all of that Medicare prescribing data and start creating alignments that could be interesting for the DOJ or the OIG to look at further. It's not conclusive because, as we know, as I said, the open payments data isn't perfect. We recognize that there are errors in it, but it might be enough to say there's some smoke here. Let's look closer to see what's going on.
So this has really been a phenomenal episode. We're not even done with it yet. We still got another 15 minutes left. This is phenomenal. I'm trying to figure out why there's only 2,500 emojis, but there's been so many gems here, and there's such a deconstruction of what actually drives the risk behind this thing that's under our purview. So thank you so much so far. We'll see how the last couple minutes work here. Just kidding. So I want to talk a little bit about the anti-kickback statute and how this kind of intersects with this, and how industry payments to physicians might fall under its purview, especially in light of the research that we've been discussing.
Yeah, I think that, and it goes back to that, but what I said earlier. But the thing is with the anti-kickback statute, that's a criminal statute, and often when I speak with physicians, we have to explain the difference between the anti-kickback statute is criminal and the Stark is civil, and that the anti-kickback statute does require that mens rea, that evil mind, to be able to be guilty, right, and for there to be a criminal component to that. And so for the physicians out there, they have to be mindful that there could be an intent from the pharmaceutical rep, and that would be sufficient for there to be a kickback concern. So if the rep is taking or engaging with the physician, so for instance, let's say I'm a pharmaceutical company and I engage a physician to speak for $2,000 a session, and I'm going to engage them for, say, 5 sessions. And I never really make sure that they do those sessions. I don't really document what they spoke on. I don't keep the PowerPoint. I don't keep the people who attended. I just really don't pay attention to that. The government might assume that there was no real benefit for me having engaged them, that physician, as a speaking fee, and that was then a
great point
kickback as a result of that, to encourage that physician to actually prescribe my medication more and to encourage other physicians to prescribe my medication more, which could then result in all of the Medicare dollars and Medicaid dollars being subject to fraud, waste, and abuse scrutiny. And here in Florida, the anti-kickback statute is pulled to all payer types. And I don't know about every state, but I do know at least here, the AKS is far-reaching because of Florida law. And so each physician has to be really mindful that if I am engaging in the speaking activity, do I have enough there to protect me so that I'm not running into issues of where this could be an anti-kickback concern. There's also the fair market value aspect of it, which can pull us over into Stark. So if you are engaged in consulting or in speaking fees, you have to teach your physicians that if you're going to do this, make sure you understand the fair market value that they're paying you at. Because if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And so you want to make sure that you're protected, because if they're paying you more than fair market value, you could be in Stark violation, which could result also in fraud, waste, and abuse scrutiny.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all these tripwires, there's all these pitfalls that exist in this entire game. This has been really good. I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned these two codes before, pharma and the AVAMED codes, and we've all heard about these, at least if we've been listening for the last 20 minutes. What are the key differences between these two voluntary industry codes, and how do they try to influence the ethical behavior? The ethical vendor interactions with medical staff? Where do they differ? Where do they fall short? What are the gaps that you've seen over your career?
Yeah, so the pharma code is really focused on the pharmaceutical industry, right? And the AdvaMed code is focused on the medical device industry. And they are completely voluntary. And so it's up to each organization to decide whether or not they are going to adhere to it. And even whenever they adhere to it, it's up to each organization to ensure that their sales reps and all of the individuals in the organization are adhering to it. And I think generally most companies are trying to adhere to it. And so the key difference, though, is that they are representative of two different industries. And because they're two different industries, you're going to have some distinctions between them about what they feel like is appropriate. And you also got to remember is that it's created by them for them, right? So you have key leaders within each of those industries getting together saying, this is what we believe is ethical for us to do. But that's not like it's like every other industry out there too. Like attorneys, they have a code of ethics that they write themselves, and so do doctors. They have one as well. So everybody writes their own codes of ethics. The key difference, though, whenever we're talking about it today, is what each is allowing. And the AdvaMed code does allow for physicians to be taken off-site. And the pharma code of ethics really encourages the sales reps to stay on-site. And that's a big difference, right? Because if the AdvaMed code allows the sales rep to go off-site, then the concept there is that whatever they're educating on may take longer. They may have more presentation materials.
I see.
And so sitting outside of the work environment may be appropriate. But a pharmaceutical rep, they may not have as much, or they may be just talking about regular drugs that are going on. And so being inside of the care setting is more appropriate. And so understanding that is important. So that way, whenever you talk to your physicians and you say to them, is that, well, the pharma code really says that pharmaceutical reps shouldn't be taking you out. Just to let you know is that if a pharmaceutical rep does take you out, you should be suspicious of that. You should really think twice about going out with them. And I think that will help some of these physicians make better decisions, because no one's teaching the physicians in medical school or during their residency how to best interact with these physicians. I know that here at Broward Health, we actually do have part of our residents communication plan. We've worked with our resident leadership in which we talk about the conflicts of interest that can arise with the vendor interactions, because we want them to have good footing going out the door. But oftentimes, many of these physicians don't have that communication to them. Instead, they're relying on someone that they know in the industry, someone that maybe in their practice, or someone at the hospital, and they're relying on, I go out all the time with this rep. Well, then I'm going to go out too, right? And so it's important that we as compliance professionals understand what the ethical guidelines are for these reps and be able to teach that to our physicians that are at our hospitals.
I love that, and I couldn't agree more. I was on a panel a while back, and one of the folks on the panel said, you want to get your behavioral science person in the conversation. And I'm thinking, like, who has a behavioral science person? That's like us. That's our job, And that's to your point, there's not a class in medical school. I don't even know if they have classes, but there's not a class in medical school where they're talking about behavioral science and what that role of influence can be. And I think it's a great opportunity for us in compliance to do what you guys are doing, to really kind of step into that conversation and share some interesting insights. You're going to get attention. Something that's interesting always pierces the veil of attention. That's what TikTok's built on, right? But exactly. Sharing something that's interesting, everyone's interested in how their brain works and how influence works and all those kinds of things, stepping into that and tying that back down to something that will ultimately help de-risk the organization, like that activity is incumbent on us. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to assert ourselves and really help our organization steer around the curve to, you know, de-risk or mitigate sort of the inherent latent risks in our organization by having conversations like this, because at the end of the day, that's the game. The game is influencing human behavior, whether they're a physician or a nurse or a volunteer or whatever.
Yeah, it's one thing to be able to say, this is our rule, this is what we don't allow to occur. It's a different thing to say is, let me tell you why we don't allow this to occur. Let me walk you through the logic of where we're coming from on this. And quite often, any of the times that we've had to discourage someone from engaging in some sort of activity, if we walk them through the why, they've seen exactly our point on this. And initially, they don't want to accept that, right? Because they want whatever that free thing is.
Exactly.
Because that's the nature of giving something to somebody. But whenever you explain to them, well, this is how it can influence your decision making, this is the influence across the organization, the perception that can be created, it starts changing those behaviors because of the why.
So in the last couple of minutes here, I want to get super practical. I want to kind of dive into what are some practical steps or processes that you've implemented or seen implemented, whether you're at a large health system or a teaching hospital or a mid-sized health system, to ensure that this transparency and conflicts of interest management is happening, especially around open payments data. Yeah,
so I think in the past, I've seen it to where we had like during the procurement process, there was and in it, whenever a physician or someone like that would request a medical device or even a pharmaceutical, we would investigate open payments, and then we would turn over our report. And to me, that always felt like it was a bit proactive. So here at Broward Health, we are moving toward leveraging some of the built-in Microsoft technologies. We've developed a Microsoft list where we're going to be tracking all of our conflicts of interest management plans. And then we're going to be distributing those through the approval system within Microsoft Teams to the relevant stakeholders, so that way they have hands-on, and then be able to use those proactively to help drive those initial discussions. So that way we can make sure that we are protecting ourselves on the front end. Because at the end of the day, the Sunshine Act, and aptly named, is just to bring light to these potential conflicts of interest. It is up to each stakeholder to determine whether or not an actual conflict of interest exists, right? Where are our lines? What are the rules that we're going to place? How are we going to manage that? And I think it's important from a reasonableness perspective is that you do approach it in that way. I think having strict lines of like, do not do this, do not do that, is a fast and easy way to lose buy-in from stakeholders. Being able to approach things from well, this is the reasonableness of it, this is what's going to occur, and that's how we can create a better situation where everyone is aware of those potential conflicts of interest.
And I mean, you know, to your point, you know, every physician is at least going to pay lip service to, you know, a commitment to patient safety. And that's always something that like we can tie into as we're, you know, something bigger than us, right? It's not about the compliance department's policy. It's that we're trying to improve patient safety, and we're trying to provide great healthcare to the patients that choose our systems or our, you know, medical facilities for whatever they need done. And I think there's a lot of power in tying into that, A, and then B, explaining the why behind the what. It's not just an arbitrary policy that's trying to prevent somebody from getting a steak or from swinging a golf club at Topgolf. It's about, you know, tying back into that North Star, which is patients which is patient, you know, safety, to your point.
And quality outcomes. And I think that's in alignment with the expectations of the DOJ and the OIG as well. You know, I think compliance is moving further away from just strictly what are the rules, these is the rules that we have to follow. It's more of like influencing patient influencing behaviors. You know, whenever I do new employee orientation, I ask everyone, well, what's compliance about? And I tell them, well, when I first started, I thought it was about being the professional hall monitor. But now that I've been in compliance for a while, I realize that compliance is about relationships and helping people make the right decision the first time. And I think that even that goes so far with open payments as well. The more we can educate, the more we can train, the more we can teach the physicians about the impact that these open payment dollars are having on in influencing, the better off all of our patients are going to be, the better patient safety, and the higher quality outcomes we'll have.
They're probably not going to memorize all these acts and all of these, regulations and all these codes of ethics. But if we can at least plant that seed in their mind where they can, have that, light bulb go on and say, oh, maybe this is something that I need to make sure I disclose, or they get a reminder in a nice video, as was mentioned in the chat, to show them how they can go ahead and check that open payment data to make sure that there's not something, inaccurate or whatever on there. It can do a lot to, again, bring them as stakeholders into our risk management operation, our risk management apparatus. Like to your point, we can't do this job alone. We need to mobilize these human sensors in our organization to do that work. So, man, we are right at time. I feel like we could have talked for another 20 minutes. Let's get one more massive emoji explosion for the one and only Christopher Martin from Broward Health. I want to tell you guys about our next couple of episodes. I hope you can join us for them. This Thursday, we're talking with Cara Novelli, and we're going to be talking about cost-effective ethics engagement. Those Thursday sessions are phenomenal, whether you're in healthcare or not. There's a lot of great ideas there that you can leverage within your organization. Compliance in healthcare seems to get a lot of budget because there's such a connection to reimbursement, but doesn't seem to be as much budget for the influence throughout the organization. So if you haven't done a compliance week in your organization, what better time than now? We're going to be going through a bunch of really cost-effective, cheap, free ideas on how to drive some more engagement and push out some more of these, talking points that should really influence the behavior. And then next Thursday, we got tariff turbulence with the one and only Matt Kelly, the coolest guy in compliance. We're going to be talking about navigating the 2025 trade landscape. So that's something you're not going to want to miss. And then, of course, on July 24th, we have Ethicsverse Day 2.0, which is going to be awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. It's been phenomenal. Find Christopher on LinkedIn. Definitely follow him, follow me, and we will see you next Thursday. Take care.